And the man who will answer or help us answer those questions is Trillian-Eskom, Transform RSA President, and David Lewis, Corruption Watch Director, joins us via Skype. Good evening to you, and thanks so much for joining us. So let's just get the genesis of where this all emanates from with McKinsey getting involved with Eskom.
Good evening, Cindy. About 4 months ago, there was a story that broke that actually McKinsey has been awarded a $1 billion plus contract by Eskom to help it with turnaround strategy and ensuring that actually Eskom makes it in terms of its services and suppliers. But then the story started expanding a bit further. Here we started seeing the emergence of a company which was actually a supplier development partner, or in the process of acquiring a supplier development partnership with McKinsey. And then we have a company called Regiment Capital, which was actually a BEE partner with McKinsey in South Africa. What is surprising is, after all this time, when McKinsey gets itself into this kind of a mess, where Eskom had paid amounts of money to Trillian, and it is actually alleged that about 400 million has been paid over to Trillian, based on an instruction coming out of McKinsey. And now McKinsey had to go in and do its own thorough assessment as to what really happened. And this story particularly is very interesting in a sense that the allegation first started off by saying that McKinsey and Trillian particularly was a Gupta-linked company, which is actually a representation of the facts. There is no link within Trillian with the Guptas. And secondly, the fact that McKinsey was the company that was in error. And at this stage, they had to use another decoy cover-up using the Guptas as an excuse is again an indication that in South Africa, the opening of businesses as well as businesses being accountable only has a one-sided aspect to it. Here we only are given one story about McKinsey being a Gupta-linked company, as well as Trillian in this case, not McKinsey. And then McKinsey being affected by this particular linkage. What about McKinsey's own conduct in terms of being here a service provider to Eskom and having been provided services for all of this time, and then suddenly they find themselves in deep waters, and then the necessary usual allegation excuses are used.
So you're guilty by association.
It's always by that.
And of course, this is requires, as we heard on day one of the Eskom inquiry, that it requires more evidence to be substantiated. David Lewis, Corruption Watch Director, good evening to you, and thanks for joining us. Just the response cited by McKinsey that it was just lack of judgment, or do you think that there were ulterior motives?
I think the question, firstly, let me just actually say, in contrast to what your other guest has just said, there is no question about Trillian's links to the Gupta family. Absolutely no question at all. Trillian-Eskom, who is often referred to as the fourth Gupta brother, he's so close to the Guptas, was the 60% shareholder of Trillian at the time that all of these deals were concluded. And that was the political connectiveness which Trillian brought to the table that enabled McKinsey to get the contract. So the three questions that are to be asked is, firstly, how did McKinsey acquire this contract in the first place? And what role did Trillian's political connectiveness, which was largely a consequence of their relationship to the Guptas, help them in getting the contract? That's question number one. Question number two is, why did Trillian, McKinsey, and Eskom have to set up this sham arrangement where sometimes it suited all of them that Trillian should be presented as a supplier, development partner, or subcontractor to McKinsey. Sometimes it suited some of them that this should not have been the case. The sham arrangements again point to the fact that effectively what Trillian was doing was providing a front that enabled McKinsey to get the contract. And the third question is, how did McKinsey
David, are you still with us?
To enter into a contract that was completely illegal and for the most unspeakable sum of money? What was in it for those Eskom executives who signed those contracts? Those are the three questions that are there to be answered. And each of them, I'm afraid, points to the possibility of criminality being involved.
All right, and you say operative word possibility with Trillian-Eskom, as you're saying, as being the common denominator. Adil, just your response to David.
Again, it's actually guilty by association. the fact that Salim Essa has, links or, even relations with the Guptas does not link the Guptas in any of the Trillian company. One. Second aspect of it, I think David needs to maybe make it very plain and clear. The matter we are discussing today is about McKinsey's corrupt as well as involved allegations of corruption with regards to the monies that they received from Eskom and being given a contract and being awarded a 1 billion plus rents contract, which they provided services, and as a result were found that they did not pursue the right channels to actually accessing the contract. How does this come back and link to another third-party organization? That's one aspect of it. But the most important thing is, here we have McKinsey, which has been in South Africa since 1994, by the way. In a statement that McKinsey released, it says, we have been working with state-owned entities since the dawn of 1994, and we arrived in South Africa, we made sure that we strengthened our relationships, and there have been service providers in this case to government, there have been service providers to SOEs, and they've been doing all of these turnaround strategies, all of these other related transformation projects and work within state-owned entities. So it is not the first contract that McKinsey as well as Trillian and Regiment in this case enjoyed with the state entities. The question is, are they willing to now fully remove themselves to make sure that they can take, again, responsibility for their wrongful action as McKinsey and company, and making sure that we can now speed up the aspect of what we call radical economic transformation? Because you have these multinationals that comes into South African economy and market and start messing around, and when they get caught that they've actually been defrauding the South African public and government, suddenly they want to use all forms of scapegoats as excuses not to take responsibility. But in this case, South African public is no longer duped anymore by these big multinationals with these huge amounts of money and these big fat checks that they can just be told that we are giving you an apology. And McKinsey says we have now taken a decision to suspend our work with state-owned entities until we get our house in order. Which criminal goes and steals and then suddenly tells you that, no, because I've stolen in that house and I got caught for a moment, let me suspend my stealing activities, and when I've got my house in order, I'll come back and continue my activities of actually taking away from the public. So this is unacceptable. I think McKinsey as well as KPMG and all these other companies that have allegedly been found to have broken the law in South Africa, to have received benefits, to have taken money from the state, must be properly prosecuted and must face the criminal charges as well as civil charges coming from the state and the public, and must be held accountable. We are sick and tired of seeing these companies get away with obscene amounts of money. Here we're talking about 1 billion that they say they are willing to pay back to the state if there is a declaration by a criminal court or even the court that gives them an order to pay back. So if the court doesn't order them, they're not going to pay back that money, which they've received already.
All right, David, just your response, especially when we're dealing with lack of empirical evidence and primarily, hold on, but primarily regurgitating what has been in the public discourse. I just want to say what Salim Issa, is that he is associated, sometimes referred to as the lieutenant of the Guptas, but he owned a Trillian, and I'm not sure if you have access to the shareholder certificate where the Gupta brothers or family directly were involved, but you can clear that for us.
I realize who you used to work for, who you probably still work for, but there is no question about Salim Essa's relationship to the Guptas. Let me tell you, a large part of the work on this contract went back to companies like Sahara Computers that are unquestionably Gupta-owned companies. So, if you want to insist that there's no Gupta link, by all means, go ahead, and you and your
David, if there's a Gupta link, what we're trying to get...
There's no question about it. Just hold on, let me finish. I think, we are referring McKinsey to the U.S. Department of Justice because we think that there is an agency, a law enforcement agency that will prosecute them. We think that in South Africa, McKinsey, Trillian, and Eskom should be prosecuted. But we have no faith in the prosecutorial agencies of the state and the law enforcement agencies of the state to do that, because they are captured by the same interests that have captured the presidency. So, don't tell me that McKinsey should be prosecuted. We are the ones who are attempting to initiate a prosecution of McKinsey. We are not simply talking on television and radio to do it. And if you and your listeners were worthy of it, you would be insisting that the NPA and the Hawks prosecuted both McKinsey, Trillian, and Eskom. Those are, in our view, the evidence points to the fact that all three were involved in a criminal conspiracy. Of that, we think the evidence is sufficiently strong to mount an investigation, but we don't have faith in the National Prosecuting Authority or the police to do that, because they are effectively in hock to the same interests that Eskom are in hock to, that Trillian are in hock to, that the presidency is in hock to.
And I can tell you, David, without any contradiction, that we're all interested in uprooting and eradicating corruption. So you certainly have my support personally. If there's any illegality, criminality that has gone on, bribery and corruption, all that is implicated need to face the law. But what we're not going to do is now to, find people guilty based on what we claim to be evidence, and yet for me it's connecting the dots. Doing business is not illegal. You know, if it borders on illegality, then we have the frame.
The evidence is very strong. Trillian took 600 million rand in a contract for which it was explicitly told it was expected to do nothing. It got that money for doing absolutely nothing except opening the door.
Okay. All right. So
Trillian received 600 million rand for. And if you think there's no evidence to that effect, well, you and I are living in different universes. I can assure you of that.
Hold on, David. Let's get a response from Adil.
I think David is talking utter rubbish. I mean, really, let's be fair. Corruption Watch is not the only agency in South Africa or even in the world that has been taking on corruption. One, the other aspect of it is he is shying away from the real issue. We are talking about Mackenzie's corrupt activities. Mackenzie is the original contract holder. Trillian comes in as a secondary partner or even service provider right now to McKinsey. So the issue is currently sitting between Eskom and McKinsey Company, which is a US-based company that has been enjoying a lot of amount of money coming out of South Africa, and they've been doing so in billions. Remember, this is not one of the only accounts that they've been enjoying. They've been enjoying other state-owned entity accounts in doing the turnaround strategies, in providing consultancy services, in billing government as much as they wanted, and not even having a ceiling to what they can build. So that's one aspect of it. So the aspect that David is trying to give us this impression that there is only one legitimate corruption, agency that has been fighting is the utter rubbish. We're not going to accept that. So one of the other things that we must remind him in that is South Africa's judiciary system is an independent judiciary system that has its own powers. If he says in the statement right now and he claims that the judiciary system in South Africa is captured, then he must come forward and tell us who among the judiciary system, as well as the judges, as well as the prosecutors, who are currently captured.
Yeah.
So because that's what his statement.
The authority is captured and the Hawks are captured. And if you have any doubt about that, you too are living in a separate universe. I have absolutely no doubt that they're captured. You will know that the head of our National Prosecuting Authority is not so affectionately referred to in South Africa as Sean the Sheep. And believe you me, that's not for nothing. Have you seen the record of prosecutorial success on behalf of the Hawks, on behalf of the NPA? Do you know what happened to the last leader of the Hawks, who was removed for dishonesty in front of the courts? There's nothing wrong with the courts. In fact, were it not for the courts, we might have been much further down the road to being a kleptocracy. But with the National Prosecuting Authority and the police, who are the ones who should bring McKinsey, Trillian, and Eskom to book, there is much that is wrong.
All right, David Lewis, thank you so much, Corruption Watch Director. And before his mother body beams him he says we live in different planets. Just closing remarks.
In our view, we believe that McKinsey needs to take full responsibility for the wrong that has happened. We're talking about transformation in South Africa, and yet we are not seeing that happen. And again, Eskom must be reprimanded, particularly for having given attention to these companies that are not even locally owned in South Africa, that are foreign organizations that have been enjoying a lot of amount of support from government. We have a BEE policy that actually makes black people second-class citizen businessmen in their own country. The policy says that you are only qualified as a BEE candidate If you are part of a white company that has already previously been providing services and solutions, so why don't we have the South African McKinseys in South Africa? Why don't we have the South African KPMGs? Why don't we have South African consulting companies that are black-owned as controlled with white companies in process?
We're seriously out of time. Trillian-Eskom is the Transform RSA president, and David Lewis, Corruption Watch Director, joining us via Skype. And thanks indeed to our guests. And of course, on to other news now. The banning order against a BLF marching to KPMG has been lifted by the Johannesburg Magistrates Court. The BLF was prevented by the Johannesburg Metro Police Department to march to KPMG headquarters on the 28th of September, calling the march illegal and unlawful. BLF President Andile Mqitama expressed his satisfaction with the judgment. BLF will now march to the audit firm's office.
Today, we as BLF were celebrating. We knew that the decision of the court would favor us. KPMG fell because the judgment, which is scathing on the police, the Metro Police who are under the DA, judgment shows that they did not follow the law, they did not even respect our rights. The administration of a fundamental right to protest has been undermined completely by the DA.
And the Black First Land First is demanding the following: that all audits and investigations by KPMG be reviewed. KPMG should immediately withdraw its report upon which the 783 charges against President Jacob Zuma were formulated. And KPMG must apologize for being an agent of white monopoly capital and regime change. And the BLF says the KPMG should reveal the pressure that put white monopoly capital agencies put on them to withdraw its report on the rogue unit at SARS. North Gauteng High Court reserves judgment on the suspension of Home Affairs Director General Mkhoseli Apleni. However, a surprise cabinet reshuffle may just turn out in Apleni's favor. NN7's Lungani Mgoni has the story.
A new twist over the Home Affairs Director General's suspension could turn the case on its head. The North Gauteng High Court was hearing Mkhoseli Apleni's application to have his suspension lifted. Home Affairs Minister Thengiwe Mkhize suspended Apleni in September, reportedly for defying orders. But the arguments could now be rendered moot after Mkhize was moved in a cabinet reshuffle.
How this case will continue and so forth, the new minister may have a different view.
Part of the suspension argument centered on animosity between Apleni and Mkhize. However, the minister's departure renders this argument irrelevant.
The cabinet reshuffle this morning, and she's one of the ministers.
Look, it may have implications for this case if you think about it. I don't mind standing down if you want to discuss it with either your attorney or with your colleagues or anybody else.
Yes, in fact, ourselves, we got the news from the DG, the applicant, that he has already been phoned by the current minister.
The court had earlier heard arguments around whether the minister had the power to suspend Apleni.
President Zuma cannot legally rely on the delegation of President Mbeki, which is a letter attached to Chapter 8 of the SMS handbook, as the basis to say that he has delegated the power to suspend and not the power to discipline. So that argument cannot be sustained.
President Zuma has not once spoken to this court. He has not signed a confirmatory affidavit.
No relief is sought against him.
Yes, but he claims that the power has been delegated. That is a question of fact, whether or not the power has been delegated. There is no affidavit from President Zuma to confirm that the power has been delegated.
The court reserved judgment pending the incoming minister's opinion on Apleni's suspension. Lungani Mguni, NN7, Pretoria.
President Jacob Zuma has officially handed over the Botlokwa bridges in Limpopo as part of government's broader infrastructure development in the province. The project consists of a road bridge and 2 pedestrian bridges on the N1 between Polokwane and Makhado. The South African National Roads Agency, SANRAL, constructed the bridges to ensure pedestrian safety. The N1 Botlokwa freeway is the busiest corridor that links South Africa with parts of the SADC region, that being Zimbabwe, Malawi, Democratic Republic of Congo, and Zambia.
The bridges that we are officially opening today are a visible example of government's commitment to deliver strategic infrastructure that will transform our economy, create jobs, and stimulate opportunities for growth. This project demonstrates the fact that government responds to the needs expressed by communities. It also demonstrates how all three spheres of government, state-owned companies, the traditional authorities can work together to solve issues that might place obstacles in the way of communities who want to grow and progress. In the National Development Plan, we highlight the importance of our roads network, which is regarded as our single most important and widely used public asset. Such roads are planned years in advance to meet the projected need for strategic economic infrastructure. This is a multi-million rand investment in this part of Limpopo and will greatly contribute to the future developmental trajectory of the region. I wish to appeal to the community to work with us to protect such infrastructure and property.
We'll take a quick ad break. Do stay with us for the latest sports and news update just after this.